I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features through our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE, symbol CRL, and the Pink, symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be back.
Carbon pricing, is it working to reduce carbon emissions and reduce the use of fossil fuels?
Well, that's an interesting question because in BC, we have been the forerunners in that. I was on the scene about a dozen years ago when this first got onto the agenda, and Gordon Campbell, the Premier at the time, he was a bit of a policy wonk. Whenever I ran into him, he always seemed to have a stack of books under his arm with the latest ideas on policy, and he wanted to know what was going on. I think he must have been reading some books about carbon pricing, got into his head that this was the answer to some of our problems that were coming up. We were seeing the federal Liberals at the time elected a leader, Stéphane Dion, who was running the Green campaign, and he got in there. I remember back in those days, I invited David Suzuki to come into the Vancouver Sun and be a guest editor. My colleagues were horrified. They said, what are you talking about? That's crazy. I said, no. I mean, look, we've got this climate change thing. People said, well, do you believe in climate change? It was an interesting conversation. Anyways, back in that time, BC got the world's first carbon tax. Since then, it's been hailed as a sort of climate hero for doing that. Well, recently, I like to go to the information itself and make my own observations rather than just take it from others. Other people have been saying this is great. It's made a big difference. It's been good for the environment. It's caused people to use way less fuel because it's made it a little more expensive. Well, I wanted to look at the facts myself, so I dug just recently into the details on this. And what I found is that over 10 years, this is quite fascinating. The reduction in gasoline for road purposes used in British Columbia for lighter vehicles is down by only 3.6%. So after setting up this big tax administration and a lot of publicity, a lot of accolades handed around for the geniuses who thought this thing up, that's all it's accomplished, which you might say, well, that's better than nothing. But when you dig deeper, and here's what gets really interesting, is that there's some trends in consumer behavior and the cars that we're buying. Let me quiz you, Jim. See if you know the answer. What would you say was the most popular car in Canada 10 years ago, 2007?
Probably a Honda Civic.
Oh, you're right. It was a Honda Civic. Wow. You always surprise me, Jim. You are the man with the pulse on things. Okay, so 10 years later, what's the most popular vehicle in Canada?
Probably some kind of SUV or perhaps the Ford 150 pickup.
There we go. I mean, the Nobel Prizes have been already handed out for the year, but next year you might be in line because that's right. We've gone from Civic to F-150 in 10 years. What's going on there, and how does it relate to the carbon tax? So here's what I think is going on, is that over the last 10 years, we've seen an unprecedented amount of pressure on automobile manufacturers around the world to improve the efficiency, fuel efficiency, environmental efficiency of their products. And that has resulted in the case of, say, the Toyota Camry, which I looked at, a 3.5 liter, six cylinder, Toyota Camry was down by about 10% for, highway efficiency. Combined efficiency improved by 8%. Exactly the same car. Maybe it was lighter. I don't know what they did, but they made quite a difference. And what we saw people do in BC was, as those efficiencies affected different vehicles throughout the whole possible inventory of cars you could buy, what they did was, rather than buy their next Toyota Camry and save 8 or 10% in fuel, what they did was they found that Ford 150 or SUV that was the same fuel consumption and cost as their Camry. So they traded up into a car that they aspired to for whatever the reasons are that people do that, and they paid the same amount. Yeah, maybe a little bit extra for fuel tax, but they were also paying more for the TransLink tax if they live in Metro Vancouver, and all these other taxes. There's 51 cents of tax on a liter of gasoline right now. So, it's hard to say that 2 cents or 5 cents or 7 cents was 7 cents that saved the planet. That's what I don't buy here. So I guess what I'm getting at, Jim, here is that the carbon tax in BC was predicted to make a big impact on fuel consumption and therefore the climate emissions. But I'm not convinced that it's actually done that. And I've written a blog. If you go to resourceworks.com, published that this morning. I've had a lot of comment. Some people are saying this is the kind of common sense analysis that we've been missing. We're getting a lot of, I guess, ideological viewpoints or politicized ideological viewpoints that are driving policy and ultimately people's lives. And, I have looked at that for some time with a degree of natural skepticism that we journalists have. And I've come up with this new analysis. So, I think it's going to provoke, I hope, a bit of soul searching amongst those who have the task of turning this into policies. And we'll see what comes of it.
Well, none of that carbon tax was directed to improving transit at all. So it doesn't matter how much they tax my liter of gasoline if they haven't expanded rapid transit into the Valley or Surrey, which is the poster child for urban sprawl in Canada. What the hell good is that carbon tax? There's no alternative but to use your private vehicle.
That's right. And I would say that there's a second pillar of spending that you could consider for a carbon tax. One of them is mass transportation, as you say. I completely agree with you. But I think the other thing is innovation. How do we ensure that those who are producing those fuels and the vehicles that burn the fuels are investing in the things that will get us more and more efficient? Lightweight materials, systems that recycle energy or prevent the escape of heat or the loss of heat energy. All those things we should be working on. We should also be investing in the upstream production of cleaner forms of stored chemical energy, hydrocarbons, which are the most reliable types of energy that we have. And, there's no replacement for that yet. And I know there's lots of people who wish that there was a replacement. I know there's lots of people who think it's terrible that we rely on hydrocarbons the way we do. Nevertheless, in our civilization of 200,000 calories a day, each one of us, everyone listening, you burn 200,000 calories a day in energy, not because you're eating a lot of French fries, but because all the things you do add up to the equivalent of 200,000 calories. And it used to be that in pre-modern times, a human would use 4,000. So it's gone up by a huge factor. And that's the reality. So unless you're willing to go back to 4,000 calories a day or somewhere between 4,000 and 200,000, we have to innovate relentlessly. And if we're not using our carbon tax revenues to do that innovation, then I think it's a dereliction of duty.
What about the fact as well that Canada produces 1.1% of the greenhouse gases on the planet when the U.S., India, and China produce well over 50%? Even if we stopped running every factory and car in our country and turned off our stoves and heaters, we would have very little impact on greenhouse gases. And of course, they're still arguing, are humans responsible for any increase in climate when in one day, a volcanic eruption can wipe out 10 years of carbon taxes?
Yeah. Well, one thing that has been irking me of late is the fact that our oil sands, which are all based on science and innovation and regulation and the fair distribution of the profits of that for the benefit of Canadians, all the right things, unlike, say, Saudi Arabia, where they murder journalists for sport, apparently. In Canada, we have got an oil sands that is continually improving. Now, I wonder how many people are aware that if you go down south, there are, I could name just 4 coal-burning electricity generating stations, 4 coal plants that release as much CO2 emissions as the entire oil sands. And if you take all of the American coal burners, that is about 20 times the size of the oil sands. It is phenomenal the amount of CO2 emissions from coal. But you never hear about that. All we hear is how horrible Canadians are because they have this really tiny oil sands industry and how the planet is going to burn up if this tiny industry continues. You know, to me, it's disgraceful that Canadians are subjected to this. And I think Canadians can be proud to stand up when they hear that. And we should all be saying, look, I'm sorry, we're not taking that anymore. I'm going to tell you that there are 4 coal plants in the U.S. that produce as much as a whole oil sands. If you want to criticize the oil sands, fine. But I expect you equally to be out there criticizing the U.S. for its policies. And if you're going to isolate Canada on this issue and not others, and you're going to encourage the import of crude oil from Russia to the west coast of Canada, which is what's happening, of Saudi Arabian oil, believe it or not, to the east coast of Canada, you know, we're not going to be having the conversation until it's a fair one. So lay off the oil sands.
How much of the propaganda against Canadian energy is funded by U.S. sources?
All the significant funding comes from the U.S. They do have some sort of ma and pa fundraising in Canada that they put up in the shop window so it looks like a domestic affair. But really it's an offshore thing because there's lots of billionaires who would love to see a park from the coast to coast in Canada. They think it's a nice place to go hunting and fishing. There's some great lodges, some nice mountains to look at, some moose they can come and shoot. And they would like to keep it that way. They're offended by the idea that Canadians want to have an economy. They're perplexed that First Nations should want to be engaged in the economy and get past the problems that I hear chiefs talking about constantly, the poverty, the afflictions that they have. It's an offense to groups. So, people with a lot of money give their money to groups in Canada to, operate public affairs campaigns and pursue legal strategies to use our very own system against Canadians to stop development. And they're not out there. I mean, if they were out there around the world doing this, I would say great. But it's really something that is especially afflicting Canada right now because we seem to be an easy target for that. We're an open democracy. We can be on radio talking about our ideas. Other people can be on radio talking about their ideas, and you're not going to be hauled into the embassy office and some thugs jump on you for saying what's on your mind. We're a free, open society, and that's the best thing about Canada. But it also means that you've got, you know, sometimes like what is the motive of some of the activism that we see? You know, I think if it's resulting in the United States oil sector increasing its wealth and success at the expense of Canada, a reasonable person should be asking what's going on here.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the Pink's CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, talking about Saudi Arabia and the situation with the disappearance of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. What should Canada be doing, and is this another argument about why we need to have our own secure energy sources?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some technical reasons why we import $2.5 billion worth of crude oil from Saudi Arabia every year. There's, I believe, some contracts in place and some refinery technology in place in eastern Canada on the east coast that makes it easier for them to rely on Saudi oil. But don't forget that in Alberta we have synthetic crude. We also have conventional crude oil that's drilled it just like they do in Texas, that if we could get it to where it could be used in Eastern Canada, they would be able to use it. And we have different grades of oil. That's often missed. So there's no reason we can't be a self-sufficient country. And if we can do that, then we can keep jobs in Canada. We can maybe even bring jobs home that we're losing. We're losing so many jobs to Texas right now because the little companies that are being battered in Alberta by the policies we have in Canada right now, they're not issuing a press release when this happens, but they're just simply packing the trucks up and driving down south to Texas. And people who own those companies, they're making significant return on their investment that has been denied them in Canada. And some people might say, oh, well, that's good for them. Well, this is an issue for everybody because the way that activity drives jobs, innovation, services in Canada is profound. And we seem to be just kissing it goodbye without much thought. So right now we're importing $2.5 billion worth of our hard-earned money in Saudi oil, and we're sending them every year. Right now it's up to about $600 million in tanks and other motorized armored vehicles, Canadian-made, to Saudi Arabia. Now I know some of the cities and towns that make those vehicles here in Canada are prospering because of that. But in the context, I think it is a little disturbing, especially given the events of the last few days that we're all still trying to understand.
Is the new Quebec government more likely to approve the construction of a pipeline back east?
Yeah, I think that we're still waiting to know the mind of the new premier of the CAQ who's been elected there. He appealed to Quebec voters on the basis of tax reduction, and since some of the things associated with current policies would include more taxes, you might expect that once he's found his feet and beginning to exercise his mandate as premier, we may see some renewed interest in that. I think it would make a lot of sense for someone with that approach. Another thing they have in Quebec, it's not just a place that could be a corridor for energy movement. It's a place that can produce energy because they have a great deal, not just of hydro dams that it's famous for, but also they have a whole lot of natural gas that recently, because of the technological innovations we've developed in Canada, we've discovered much of it in the Gas Bay of that part of Quebec. And if they can develop that, they can become self-sufficient in natural gas. They could accomplish their Plan Nord dream, which is to make the north of Quebec. Right now they have to burn a lot of diesel in generators to keep communities' lights on. And so if they're able to get LNG that's made in Quebec, they can supply the whole province. And a lot of people are quite excited about that. So if the new premier is into that as well, I think it could be a dramatically different thing. You know, the same trends with automobiles that we've seen in British Columbia, people going up into bigger cars, they've seen that in Quebec as well. So they are using a lot of energy there, and they need to get it from somewhere.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, the National Post did an article about Canadians being suckers when it comes to energy exports. Can you maybe explain that to us?
Yeah, well, the thing that's going on here, and we were talking about a recent article by Kelly McParland at the National Post. I thought he was bang on. He's talking about something that's been in the news quite a bit. It's the spread, the difference between the value, selling price of Canadian oil and what it should be. And this gap has recently, just actually yesterday, reached an all-time high. It's like $50 difference. That's a discount of $50. So something that should be worth $70, we're selling it for $20. And if you think of it a different way, now Premier Moe of Saskatchewan, I believe, tweeted this out this afternoon. He suggested, and this is a great analogy, that imagine a car that you would right now be paying $30,000 for. It was selling for $12,000. Well, as a consumer, you'd probably think that's a great bargain. But if you're the person making it, not so much. And that's what's going on right now. So we're giving this valuable hydrocarbon away. I was talking with a journalist visiting Vancouver from the BBC a couple of days ago, and I was describing this in terms of I would say the moral lapse of giving away a non-renewable resource like this. It's irresponsible to do this. Like, why would we do that? You only have one chance to use that hydrocarbon molecule responsibly. What are you doing with it? You're giving it to Donald Trump. That's responsible for a fraction of its value. Well, how responsible is that? And so,
Stewart, my question is, if Canadian oil is only getting $20, how come our gasoline prices are so high?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if you look at refineries and costs, you go to Gas Buddy and look at some of their charts over there. You can see 10 years of gasoline history. It's really interesting, and I believe that the cost of the crude oil is not the biggest factor there, because they have these taxes you've got to pay, and they've got the cost of transportation of the commodity, and they've got the cost of retailing, the cost of the refining. So, those are the big costs. And yeah, for sure, the crude oil cost is an input factor, but it's not the biggest driver. Across Canada right now, look at what's happening. I think in the Toronto area, people are filling their cars up for $1.12 or so this week, whereas it's up over $1.50 on the West Coast. That's a giant disparity. Is that because of the price of crude oil? Well, no, it's other factors involved there.
Stewart, we also talked just before the interview about alternative energy, if you're using solar or wind, and how you can't really rely on them all the time, even if you have a good battery storage. Can you maybe explain that story?
Yeah, I am a big advocate of energy diversification, a smorgasbord approach. Let's have as many appropriate types of energy as we can get for the different things that we need to solve. I was recently on a drilling pad up in the northeast of BC. They were fracking a well there, and I looked around. There was a set of gauges that was run off a solar panel, and I thought, that's really the practical ingenuity of people developing energy who are actually out in the field doing it. They will use the most appropriate, most economical, smartest solution for the problem. They don't really care what it is. So if you're agnostic about it, you just simply are out there to choose the best, most practical solutions. What are you going to do? I think that's really what we need to get back to. A lot of the conversations I hear are more ideological, as in, oh, you're a bad person because you think hydrocarbons are a way to get energy. You should want solar instead. That would make you a good person if you wanted that. Well, I'm sorry. I just don't see the world that way. I don't think any sensible person ought to. And we need to take a look at these options. And, talking about Ontario, we see that the new government there has recently made some big changes. They've rolled back carbon pricing. As a result, there's been a reduction in the gasoline price. They're also looking at very significant costs to break some contracts for the renewable energy that the previous government entered into. I'm not sure. I think all of that's a good idea, but I think they have definitely been asking some tough questions about the energy supply. Don't forget that the government before them had a couple of billion-dollar contracts they canceled for very, very small-minded political reasons that were natural gas plants that they canceled. And, that could have been a very efficient way and a very clean way to get electricity for Ontarians. In BC, I think the government right now has made a bold decision on Site C. Two governments consecutively have said we need to have more of that kind of hydro green electricity. That's a good thing. The government has recognized the LNG Canada project, $40 billion project to export natural gas from Kitimat as a priority, and the project has moved ahead. That's a great development. I think there's some really good signs of common sense thinking. However, as I've said, the carbon pricing is almost philosophically oriented towards a predetermined outcome, what I would call a deterministic solution, where those who just don't like hydrocarbons and don't think they can be improved and think it's a waste of money to try to improve them are saying, no, we're going to move to our solar panels and wind turbines because we've determined that those are the best things. Well, they've determined wrong if they are not applying them in the smartest way. And that's where we get into, I think a lot of potential costs. And if we have a dependence on one type of energy that turns out not to be sustainable or supportable, all of these, it doesn't matter if it's natural gas or coal or hydro or wind or anything. They all have issues, and all these issues have to be managed. And I think often lately we're losing sight of that as people get fixated on one particular solution or type of solution to the expense of others.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for our guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.